Cairo had visible evidence that the invincible Mongols had been overthrown and scattered. The victorious Mamluks pursued the remnants of the armies across the Euphrates, and the strongholds of Islam rejoiced. Qutuz distributed rewards and loot to his followers, but he neglected Baibars, to whom his success was due, and Baibars was not the man to endure neglect. While Cairo celebrated the victory, he assembled his Mamluks and assassinated Qutuz. Criers went through the public places, calling upon the crowds, "O believers, pray for the mercy of Allah upon the soul of the Sultan Qutuz, and long life to your Sultan Baibars as Zahir." Baibars the victorious. The panther was much too popular with the crowds to be injured by the murder of Qutuz. Moreover, faithless and brutal though he might be, he was on this occasion the savior of Islam. Promptly, he proclaimed a holy war against Crusaders and Mongols, knowing perfectly that his defeat of Kitboga's frontier force meant little, except retaliation by Hulagu's mighty Ordu. He proceeded to war in earnest, availing himself again of a Mongol expedient. He marched through Syria and evacuated the population from the northern part. Then he burned the grass to the Euphrates, cutting down the orchards and firing the villages, making sure that the Mongol Ordu would find no grazing or food in this waste area. He compelled envoys of the Crusaders and Syrian assassins to march with him and to impress them with the advisability of remaining neutral. He castrated or put to death 500 captive Armenians. In these days, Baibars kept close watch to the north, where Hulagu was. He provided his sentry points with air mail, messenger pigeons to warn him of any sight of the Mongols. When he camped for the night, he never slept twice in the same tent, and he slept in clothes with a horse saddled at the tent entrance. Then his outpost brought in some Mongols who were not from Hulagu's Ordu. They were riders from the Caucasus, from the Golden Horde, bringing a message of peace and friendship from Birkai Khan. In the steppes, Birkai had heard of the death of Mungu and of the surprising defeat of Hulagu's division in Palestine. What was it called, Palestine at that time? Muqaddasa was one of its names. He had seemed very advisable to Birkai to send his congratulations to the panther. Never, perhaps, had so welcome a message come to a man who could make such good use of it. Baibars saw instantly that the strongest allies he could have against the Mongols were the Mongols themselves. He feasted the riders from the steppes in Cairo, gave them young women, I presume, and rank, in his own halqa, kept some of them to drill his Mamluks, and dispatched an embassy of his own with the others. He also sent a few well-chosen gifts after he had inquired as to Birkai's tastes, copies of the Quran wrapped in silk embroidered with gold, which he said was illumined by the Caliph Othman himself. A throne of ivory and ebony, gleaming prayer carpets, fine swords with silver handles, Damascus bows with silk cords, gorgeous parrots, Arab horses, swift paced dromedaries with a herd of wild donkey, giraffes, and painted saddlecloths, a turban which had been on pilgrimage to Mecca, for Baibars hastily sent one of his officers there in Birkai's name. Also the young girls skilled in cooking and singing, you can't tell the age with that one, and a guard of eunuchs to attend them, and a menagerie of monkeys fitted out with silk garments. Now, The Islamic stance on eunuchs is that you don't become a eunuch, that it's not keeping you from sin to, become a eunuch, and it's not something that you should do to other people. But eunuchs were certainly allowed a place in their society. Nothing could have been more to the liking of the Khan of the Golden Horde. Baibars himself wrote the letter to accompany the gifts, a missive from the humble Kipchak to the Khan of the Kipchaks, from one ardent Muslim to a mighty convert to Islam. The letter pointed out plausibly that Hulagu seemed to be waging no less than a campaign of extermination against Islam, while the insignificant Panther was striving to restore the caliphate and to carry on a holy war against the frontiersmen. Islam does not believe in wars against people because they're of a different faith. It's, they're invaders, they're oppressors, persecutors, and they're putting an end to that. Baibars added that he would have Berkai's name mentioned in the prayers of the Cairo Cathedral Mosque. Jami Masjid. And he suggested that Berkai might aid by attacking the rear of Hulagu's Ordu. It was all very politic and friendly, and it eliminated Hulagu as a threat to Egypt. For the first time, a member of the Golden family moved to protect an alien people against his own kin, Baibars and the end of the Crusades. Hulagu never made the journey back to his homeland. The elder Mongols of his Ordu, many of whom remembered the face and the words of Genghis Khan, thought only of revenge for Kitboga's death. Upon Hulagu lay the obligation by every cannon of the steppe dwellers to crush Egypt and to pull down the brick walls of Cairo into the desert sand. This, of necessity, Hulagu prepared to do. On his part, Baibars organized his growing army to meet the attack, drilling his horsemen in Mongol tactics. He even indulged in a jest to dispel the dread of the Mongols which still obsessed his Muslimin. Disappearing into the north, he wandered through Hulagu's domain in the guise of a tall minstrel. At a pastry shop where he fed himself and listened to the talk, he took pains to leave his signet ring behind and a cake where it would be sure to be found later when he had gained his own frontier. He dedicated a message to the Ilkhan. I left my ring at your roadhouse. Will you have the goodwill to seek it out and return it to me because I value it? What Hulagu thought of this gasconade we do not know, but when the tale of it was told in the bazaars of Cairo, the listeners rocked with mirth. And when in the early winter of 1262 of the Vulgar era, Hulagu prepared to advance with his Ordu against Egypt, an army of the Golden Horde moved down to the passes of the Caucasus. Again, Hulagu halted. He could not continue south with a hostile Mongol force at his rear. Turning sharply, he led an army of attack through the grazing lands and the Iron Gate, where the high ranges meet the narrow edge of the Caspian. Taking the encampment of the Golden Horde by surprise beyond the river Terek, he drove his cousin's divisions northward into the steppes, only to be caught himself by a sudden counterattack. Retreating over the ice of the Terek, he suffered heavy loss when the ice gave way beneath his horsemen and the rearmost division was cut off. This clash of the mighty armies of invasion began a blood feud between the master of the Sarai and the Ilkhan of Persia. Hulagu's avalanche of invasion was checked as they had struggled in merciless civil war in the Gobi before Genghis Khan laid his restraint upon them. The new Mongol empires, no longer isolated clans, were locked in conflict. The forested passes of the Caucasus barrier became the roads of the riding armies. Contingents of Russians were enlisted by Berkai, while Hulagu sent his Georgian and Armenian allies north. The conflict spread to the eastward because the Mongol armies had a vast range of maneuver. Here, Berkai gained new allies, the fanatical Muslims of Bokhara and Samarkand needed no encouragement to join the Holy War. Well, Islam does not allow fanaticism, either in the treating the temple or the teacher as the message, or in the sense of, well, I'm going to hold up the label, but am I going to live the principles? And you find out the difference between killing the name of and killing in the way of. Islam combines the two, but let's not associate a holy war of the Crusaders where you force convert people with something that's Islamically allowed. And obviously Burkai was championing the cause of Islam against Ilkhan. So Hulagu had to defend his inner frontier against his blood kin both west and east of the Caspian. The civil war raged without decision. The Mongol commanders on both sides were too adroit to be caught again at a disadvantage. Their new empires covered too vast a territory to be invaded successfully. No great city could be besieged while a Mongol army remained at large within 1,000 miles, so the nomad emperors reverted to their ancestral manner of raiding and plundering. One power could have checked the conflict, a command from the Khan at Karakorum, but now, owing to an unforeseen crisis in the Far East, there was no Khan seated in the Mongol homeland. Then began a remarkable contest of strategy. Paying little attention to Burkai's raids, Hulagu set himself the task of finding new allies in the West. For the first time, a reigning Khan of the Golden Family abandoned the war against civilization to make an alliance with the strongest military power in the West, the kings of Europe. This was precisely what Baibars dreaded. For all his boasting, the Panther had no desire to draw down on his head a general crusade, while the knights still held their Maginot line of castles along the Syrian coast. When Hulagu made advances for a marriage between his family and the imperial dynasty of Constantinople, Baibars advised the Khan of Sarai to do the same. Eventually, both Mongols secured their wish. Hulagu's son, Abaka, was wedded to Maria, a bastard daughter of the Emperor of Constantinople, while Nogai, Burkai's young nephew, victor over Hulagu in the first battle in the Caucasus, received another daughter of the Imperial Purple as bride. Then, Baibars, or his agents, attempted more direct action. Hulagu was much too dangerous to be allowed to survive. A comet appeared in the sky, Rashid ad-Din relates, in the shape of a fiery pillar, and showed itself for several nights. When at last it disappeared, there befell a great catastrophe. Hulagu, it seems, had taken the comet for an omen. As soon as he saw it, the sky had made a sign appear to him. He touched the ground with his head. Another Muslim explains, his fears increasing as the light of the comet diminished. Oh, did he prostrate on his nose and forehead? With his hands and his knees and his feet? Facing Mecca, probably. This sign and the warning of his Muslim astrologers was, he did not serve to make Hulagu abandon the war. Whether he was poisoned by the Muslimin, we do not know, but he died of sickness, and within a year, Doku's Khatun was dead as well. The grief of the Christians was great throughout the world. Bar Hebraeus explains that the loss of these two illuminators and the protectors of the Christian faith, and Stephen the Orphelin laments, in stronger words, the great king, master of the world and hope of the Christians, died in the year 1264, and he was followed by his wife Doku's Khatun, and they were both poisoned by the craft of a Muslim. The Lord knows they were not less in well-doing than Constantine and his mother Helen. Well, a lot of fake artifacts appeared because of all that. The irony of it is that the Mongol Ilkhan had desired no religious war with the Muslimin, and he had tried to follow the ancestral tradition of religious tolerance, a policy incomprehensible to the Western Christians. Abaka, his son, did likewise with no better results. He sent letters and embassies to Edward of England and to the Pope at the Council of Lyons, urging an alliance of the Crusaders and Mongols against Egypt. In these messages, unlike the warning of Kuyuk's missive, there was no threat. Such an alliance might have been successful. It was favored by Rome, but the Christian chivalry engrossed in its own quarrels, paid no heed to it. Meanwhile, Baibars had made a shrewder move. Instead of approaching the courts, he opened negotiation with the moneyed interest of the West. The Venetian merchant republic in particular, since the caravan routes into Asia were thrown into turmoil by the civil war of the Mongols. In those years, a young Venetian merchant, Messer Marco Polo, who visited Sarai with his uncles, had been obliged to go to the Far East for a market because he could not reach the cities of the Il Khan. Baibars pointed out that Egypt was becoming the great entrepot of trade with the East. There, in Cairo, the much-desired spices could be had by Venetians. He offered those enterprising merchants concessions in the new Egyptian market. With the merchants of Sicily, he arrived at the same understanding. He reached an agreement with Constantinople to open the slave markets of the Black Sea to the Mamluks. Thus, fortified with trade pacts, he approached Charles of Anjou of Sicily, one of the leaders of the crusade then forming. The trade in slaves and spices was a source of wealth. The Venetian monopoly, the markets of Constantinople and Cairo, all these were too important to be disturbed. In the end, Baibars gained his point. Now, Islam, for example, also opposes the generational slavery. No one's allowed to be born into slavery as such. You can say they're not separated from their parents for, but, it's not a, And the crusade, led by Louis of France, John of Aragon, and Charles of Anjou, when at last it set forth, was diverted from these markets to a futile attack upon Tunis along the African coast. And it's not right to have wars just to produce slaves. Slavery should be to stop the wars. That should be the point of slavery. There, plague decimated the Crusaders' camp, and the saintly Louis died of it. With him vanished the moving spirit of the last crusades. The dodged Edward of England alone reached the coast of the Holy Land to be wounded there by an assassin's knife. Later, in 1281, Abaka moved against Egypt without support from the Crusades. His Mongol army, strengthened by the Georgians and Armenians, was met in Syria and checked by the Mamluk host, commanded by Kalabun, who succeeded Baibars. The Mamluks were able to scatter one wing of the Mongol formation and to wound its commander, and the Mongols retreated with their allies again beyond the Euphrates. Many of them rode the Muslim horses, explains an English crusader who witnessed the battle, which were better than their own. Just call them Arabian or Persian breeds or whatever, but, well, now they do. And this observer wrote earnestly to his liege lord, Edward of England, "The Holy Land was never so easy of conquest as now, with able generals and store of food, yet never have we seen so few soldiers of so little counsel in it. The Mongol Ilkhans, like the English knight, could not understand why no allies appeared from Western Europe. They had inspected the line of Crusader castles on the heights along the Syrian coast, huge fortifications, which had resisted attack until then, as formidable in their way as the Great Wall of China. But no armies of Crusaders appeared out of the sea. The Ilkhans persisted, Argun wrote to Honorius IV, a letter which has been preserved in Latin translation in the Vatican, asking once more for the help of a crusade. He ends his appeal as the land of the Muslimin lies between you and us. We can surround it and strangle it. We can drive out the Muslimin with the help of their false god and the Pope and Genghis Khan." Then Argun sent a priest of his own to Rome, a Uyghur Christian who had wandered out from China. This unusual emissary from the east journeyed faithfully to the Byzantine emperor, to the Genoese merchants, and to St. Peter's in Rome, where he was received by the sea of cardinals who hardly knew what to make of him. This envoy from Asia, Rabban Salma, tells in his own words how he tried to make his mission clear, and after many days they came to great Rome, and they entered the church of Peter, where is the see of the Reverend Pope, where 12 men stand in council to elect a new pope. Rabban Salma sent word to them, saying, "We are ambassadors from King Argun and the Catholicos of the East." And Rabban Salma was bidden to enter to the 12 cardinals who did not rise in his presence, getting rumbly in the temple about the do not rise in their presence, because they stand not before other men, such as the dignity of their see, but they set Rabban Salma by them. And one asked, "Why hast thou come hither?" The Mongols, he said to them, with the Catholicos of the East have sent me to the Reverend Pope with letters, and they asked him, what is this region of the earth? Why hast thou come? Where does the Catholicos live? In Baghdad. What art thou there? I am deacon of the monastery there. Who among the apostles taught the religion you profess? Mar Thomas and Mar Adai and Mar Marie taught us, and we hold to their teaching until now. It amazes us, they said, that thou, a Christian and deacon, hath come hither as ambassador of the king of the Mongols. This same king, Bar Salma, said, "We would like well to conquer the lands of Syria and Palestine and ask your help because of the captivity of Jerusalem, and he sent me, who am a Christian, and my word should be believed by you." While the strange Rabban was honored by the cardinals, he could not convince them of the reality of his mission. He was conducted on to Paris and the French king, and to Edward I of England at Bordeaux. Always, my French pronunciation is, don't know of it. Always greeted with surprise and delight, and accomplishing nothing. A year has gone by, he laments, and what have I to say to the Mongols? Argun had no blame for the good Rabban. A last time the Ilkhan wrote to Philip the Fair, "Here is our word, King of France. We ask you to depart from your country in the last month of winter of the first year of the Panther, and to camp near Damascus the 15th of the first month of spring. If on your side you will send armed forces at this time, we will retake Jerusalem and give it to you. But it would be useless to move our forces if you were going to fail to be at the meeting place." After that, Mongol envoys were sent on a final round of the European courts, but they came back with only meaningless compliments. The princes of the West were too preoccupied with their own quarrels to venture again into Asia to attempt to reach Jerusalem. Ironically, in these last months, they wasted all the efforts of 2 centuries of the Crusades. Baibars had saved Egypt from the Mongol invasion. More than that, the Mamluks, his successors, liquidated the Crusaders' castles on the coast soon after Argun's missions to Europe. The Ilkhans made no further attempt to reach the sea or to establish contact with the Christian powers. They retired behind the frontiers of their new domain, which stretched from Asia Minor to India. Nor did they return to the attack upon civilization. They were surrounded by grandeur enough to satisfy even Mongols. After 3 generations, the strong tribal instincts softened. Hulagu's descendants did not adapt themselves to cities and to labor. They believed themselves to be still hard and enduring and free as the Golden Family had been. They still spent most of their lives on horseback, in the chase and frontier wars. They built cities of their own, levying heavy taxes on the agricultural populations, to construct gardens and game preserves. To carry on the work of administration, they relied more and more on the intelligent Muslim wazirs, or ministers, which, as that descends from the Egyptian usur because of the bull penis staffs that these people carried. Well, I'm not saying that the Muslims are carrying those staffs necessarily, but that's where the term comes from. It was the name of the staff, too. and they were inclined to grant favors to those who came into their feet with the largest presents. Without realizing it, they were becoming enamored of the culture of Persia, and the staff was a symbol related to us, who we call Osiris, or that name, you could say more like it. In the north, however, Berkay's dynasty remained isolated behind the Volga in the steppes. The Golden Horde, like the Ilkhans, had abandoned the attack on the west. Surged by subject Russia, it lived in barbaric luxury, taking delight in hearing its exploits made into songs by minstrels and intermarrying with the princely Russian families. Well, I wouldn't say that people are barbaric just because they're of a different faith or nation or tribe or something. Here, however, a sharp division was taking place. Nogai, the Mongol Noyan who had forced Hulagu back from the Caucasus, had possessed himself in the fertile Ukraine, the grassland almost deserted after the Mongol conquest. He chose to remain there with his army, and after Berkay's death in 1267, there was no Khan of Sarai dominant enough to make him yield his conquest. With a Byzantine beauty for wife to guide him, he made an inroad of his own through the Balkans as far as the Aegean, becoming the master of the Serbs and the Bulgars at the end of the steppes. In particular, he took delight in the sun-warmed Crimea, where Venetian merchants appeared to buy slaves, and the debris of defeated people clustered in foreign settlements, Greeks who had altered into nomads, long-haired Goths who still spoke their German tongue, Turks who had sought refuge from the earlier Mongol invasions. There Nogai, son-in-law of the Emperor of Constantinople, established a dynasty of his own. His Ordu became known as the Nogai Tatars, or the Krim Tatars. Of all the conquerors in the West, his people kept closest the tradition of the steppe dwellers. By then, in the third generation after the death of Genghis Khan, the Mongols in the West had cast off all dependence on the Khan of Karakorum. They struck coins in their own names and sent no gifts to the kinsmen in the East, because by then there was no Khan at Karakorum.